I staged my own homelessness to answer one question: who actually loves me? My oldest son, a CEO, gave me $250 and closed the door. My daughter, who cares about image, sent me to a shelter. But my youngest, a teacher earning modest wages, welcomed me without question. When I overheard her and her bus driver husband discussing selling their wedding rings to help me, I knew the answer. Then my lawyer arrived with proof, the moment they realized what I'd done. That's when the real transformation began. Hey there, friend. Thanks so much for joining me today. Before we dive into this journey, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me your story, or just say hello. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the lessons that could change your family forever. Quick note, while this narrative includes dramatized moments for impact, the heart of what you're about to hear is absolutely real. 3 phone calls on the same evening changed everything. By the time the third one ended, I understood that I had failed at the one thing that actually mattered. I was sitting in my office on the 23rd floor of the Hastings Building in downtown Boston. The city lights spread below me like a map of my life. Every street represented a business deal, every corner a moment when I chose work over family. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Most people had gone home hours ago, but I was still here, the soft glow of my computer screen, casting shadows across my desk, reviewing quarterly reports that detailed the rise of my empire. My cell phone buzzed first. Michael. Mom, I need to talk to you about something. He said, his voice carrying that familiar tone, the one he reserved for when he wanted something. I have an opportunity, a real one, a startup that's going to change everything. I listened as he outlined his plan with the practiced efficiency of someone who had already convinced himself. $3 million. Well, not exactly $3 million, he was being modest. $250,000. A tech venture with his business partner. Cloud computing infrastructure. Market disruption. The usual language of ambition. I know I'm asking a lot, he said, but he didn't sound like he knew that at all. He sounded like he was informing me of a decision already made, not requesting permission. But this is important, Mom. I need your help. I could hear the calculation in his voice, not malice, just habit. The habit of assuming that his mother's resources existed for his convenience, that love and money were interchangeable currencies. I'll think about it, I said, which was what I always said. The second call came 20 minutes later. Amber. Mom, hi, I'm so glad I caught you. Her voice was bright, animated, pitched perfectly to suggest she was doing me a favor by calling. I have something exciting I wanted to tell you about. An event planning company. A big contract with a pharmaceutical conference. 3 days, 500 attendees, 5-star accommodations. But she needed capital. $130,000 to cover the initial costs, the team, the logistics. It's going to be huge, she said. I could picture her perfectly manicured nails, perfect hair, perfect pitch. I just need a little help getting started. A little help. In Amber's language, that meant money. In most families, it might mean advice or introductions or emotional support, but in mine, it always meant money. I told her I would consider it. The same response I had given Michael. The same response I had been giving for years, a kind of parental reflex that had calcified into something meaningless. And then at 9:45, my phone lit up one more time. Sophie. Hi, Mom, she said. Her voice carried no agenda, no calculation, just warmth, just presence. I was thinking about you. How was your day? Are you taking care of yourself? We talked for 15 minutes. She didn't ask me for anything. She didn't mention business or opportunities or the future. She asked about my health, about my stress levels, about whether I was eating well. She told me about one of her students who had finally learned to read after months of struggling. She told me she was proud of me even though she didn't specify what for. I love you, Mom, she said before we hung up. Not I need you or can you help me? Just that. Simple. Complete. When we ended the call, I sat in the darkness of my office for a long time. The city lights glowed below me, indifferent to the moment happening inside this glass tower. 3 calls. 3 children. And in those 3 calls, the truth of my life became undeniable. Michael wanted my money. Amber wanted my money. Sophie wanted me. That distinction sat in my chest like a stone, heavy, immovable, impossible to ignore. I had built an empire worth $68 million. I had sacrificed 20 years creating something that would secure my children's futures. I had given Michael his education, given Amber her confidence, given all of them the foundation for success. And yet in that moment I realized that the one child I had done the least for was the only one who actually loved me. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. The city was still glowing below, indifferent to my realization. Somewhere out there, Michael was calculating returns on investment. Somewhere out there, Amber was reviewing event logistics. And somewhere else, Sophie was probably reading, thinking about her students secure in a love that didn't require anything except itself. That night, I made a decision. I would find out who really loved me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. I would disappear into homelessness for 3 days and see which of my children would open their doors. Which of them would help their mother not for money or status, but simply because she was their mother. And I would discover the answer the hard way. I called Thomas at 1 a.m. I knew he would try to stop me. But he was the only person I could trust with what I was about to do. Thomas Blackwell had been my lawyer for over 20 years. He was more than that, though. He was the person who had stood by me when my husband died, who had held my hand during the worst board meetings, who had never once asked me for more than I could give. He was in many ways the only family I had left. When everyone else saw Diane Richardson, the CEO, Thomas had always seen Diane the woman. His voice came through groggy, confused. "Diane." "What's wrong? Are you okay? It's 1 a.m. "I'm fine," I said, "but I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you tell me I'm insane." I could hear him shifting, becoming alert. In all our years together, he had learned that my midnight calls usually meant something significant, something that couldn't wait for business hours. I laid out the plan, every detail, how I would disappear, pretend to be homeless, knock on my children's doors, how I would offer them nothing but my need, how I would watch their choices without the distraction of my wealth to influence them. There was a long silence on the other end. "Diane," he finally said, and his voice carried the weight of genuine concern. "You're 60 years old. You have $68 million in assets. You built a company from nothing. You survived the loss of your husband and came out stronger. And now you want to spend 3 days pretending to be homeless to test your children. That's not just risky, Diane, that's dangerous." "I'm not asking for safe," I said quietly. "I'm asking for truth. There are better ways to get truth. You could ask them directly. You could hire someone to—" "They would lie." I interrupted him, my voice harder now. "Or worse, they would tell me what they think I want to hear. Money makes people creative, Thomas. It makes them say the right things, do the right things, but for all the wrong reasons. I need to know who they are when I'm not in the picture, when there's nothing to gain from being kind to me." He was quiet again. I could almost hear him thinking through his legal concerns, his liability worries, his genuine fear that I would get hurt out there on the streets. "What?" he asked finally, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Why do you need this so badly? You know your children love you, don't you?" "Do I?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Michael wants my money for his startup. Amber wants my money for her event business. They need me because I have resources. They need what I can provide. I paused, letting him sit with that uncomfortable truth. Sophie just called to ask how I was. She asked if I was taking care of myself. She asked about my day. I let that contrast sit with him. I knew the moment it landed because his breathing changed. "Just one more thing," I continued. "I need you to help me. I need burner phones, a security team watching from a distance just in case something goes truly wrong. I need someone to know where I am, who I'm with, and I need someone to be ready to reveal the truth when I decide it's time." Thomas exhaled slowly. "If I do this, if I help you, you have to promise me something. You have to promise that you're prepared for what you might find out. Some truths. Diane, they don't heal. They break things further. They change relationships in ways that can't be undone. I know, I said, and you're still willing, even knowing that I have to be. He was quiet for a moment then. This is going to hurt Diane. Are you prepared for that? Not just the hurt of sleeping on the street, but the hurt of knowing who your children really are. I wasn't. Not really. I had stopped being prepared for anything the moment I hung up the phone with Sophie and realized that my youngest daughter was the only child who had called me without wanting something in return. The only one who had asked about me instead of asking me for help. No, I admitted, but I have to know anyway. There was another pause. Then I heard him sigh. Okay, he said quietly. I'll help you. But Diane, once you start this, there's no going back. I know. Then we'll talk tomorrow. Get some sleep if you can. I knew I wouldn't sleep, but I thanked him anyway. The next morning, I began to erase myself. Every luxury, every symbol of success, I shed it all like a second skin I no longer needed. I started with my jewelry. Years of accumulation sat in velvet boxes on my dresser. The diamond rings from my husband, the emerald necklace from a successful merger, the Cartier bracelet I'd bought myself after closing the biggest deal of my career. I opened the safe in my bedroom closet and placed each piece inside. The weight of them in my hands felt heavier than usual, as if they carried not just gold and gems, but every choice I'd made to prioritize wealth over everything else. Next came the clothes. I went to a thrift store downtown somewhere I'd never been before. The smell hit me immediately. Old fabric dust, forgotten lives. I pulled things off racks without looking at labels or designers. A gray coat with a torn pocket, stained pants that hung loose on my frame, a sweater with a small hole near the hem, $30 for everything. I'd spent more than that on coffee this week. In the bathroom mirror of my penthouse, I began the transformation. I dirtied my hands with soil from the plant on my balcony, working the earth under my fingernails. I ran my fingers through my hair without washing it, messing it into tangles. I hadn't gone more than 3 days without a salon appointment in 15 years. Now I would do the opposite. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was unrecognizable. Her eyes were still mine, but everything else had changed. The careful makeup was gone. The styled hair hung limp and unwashed. The expensive clothes had been replaced by thrift store finds. She looked tired. She looked desperate. She looked exactly like someone who had lost everything. That's when it truly hit me. I wasn't just changing my appearance, I was disappearing. I gathered what little I had, just the clothes on my back, a change of underwear, some cash, and tied it all into a torn plastic bag I found under the kitchen sink. The bag had a hole in one corner, and as I held it, I realized it might tear. That was fine. It felt right somehow. A homeless person wouldn't worry about keeping their belongings organized. They would just carry whatever they had and hope it held together. By evening, I stood at the door of my apartment for the last time. The penthouse that had represented everything I'd worked for. The glass walls that overlooked the entire city of Boston, a kingdom I'd built from nothing. The furniture that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. The art on the walls that I'd purchased as investments, never really looking at them. I stepped out into the hallway and walked toward the elevator. The ride down 23 floors felt longer than I remembered. Each floor was a descent into another version of myself. By the time I reached the lobby, I felt like a different person entirely. The security guard who'd worked here for 5 years glanced up from his desk and looked back down without recognition. I was invisible to him now, invisible to everyone. Outside, the November cold wrapped around me immediately, real cold. Not the kind you experience getting from your heated car to a heated building. This was different. This was the cold that got into your bones and reminded you that you were alone. I pulled the thin coat around me and started walking. The streets of Boston at night looked different when you didn't belong to them anymore. People moved past me without seeing me. A businessman rushed by without slowing down. A couple on a date glanced in my direction and then away. I had become part of the background part of the landscape of the city, rather than someone moving through it. I walked for hours with no real destination in mind. By midnight, I found myself at the bus station downtown. The homeless shelter was full, someone told me. There was a church that sometimes opened their doors, but not tonight. So I found a corner near the station entrance, sat down on the cold tile floor, and tried to understand what I'd just done. I was no longer Diane Richardson, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I was just a woman in the cold carrying everything I owned in a torn plastic bag, waiting to discover who my children really were. Michael's door opened almost immediately. For a moment, I thought I saw recognition flash across his face. I was right, but what followed was far worse than if he hadn't recognized me at all. I had walked from the bus station through the cold November night. Beacon Hill rose around me like a museum of wealth, gas lamps, bricks, sidewalks, the kind of old money that whispered rather than shouted. I knew this neighborhood. I'd helped Michael pick out his apartment. I'd written the down payment check. When I reached his building, my hands were shaking. The intercom buzzed. "Hello, Michael, it's Mom." I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "Come up." The elevator ride felt surreal. By the time I reached his door, my heart was hammering. I knocked. He opened it within seconds. For just a fraction of a second, his face registered nothing. Then his eyes narrowed, searching. And I watched as something shifted behind them, a moment of pure recognition, before it was replaced by something else entirely. "Mom." His voice carried genuine shock. "Jesus, what happened to you?" In that first instant, I saw it. Real concern, real love. A son looking at his mother in distress. I felt a flutter of hope. Then he looked past me, out into the hallway. His body tensed. "Come inside," he said quickly. "Now." He grabbed my arm gently but firmly and pulled me into the apartment, closing the door with more force than necessary. Then he walked to the window, peered through the curtains, and checked the hallway through the peephole. "Michael, I started. "Wait," he interrupted. He turned to face me, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The businessman was weighing something, pricing it. "I lost everything," I said, deciding to lay it out. "The company faced unforeseen circumstances. Creditors took the house. I've been on the street for 3 days. I just need a place to sleep. One night." He ran a hand through his hair. His apartment was all glass and steel, modern, expensive, deliberately impersonal. It matched him perfectly. "I can't," he said finally. The words hung between us like a verdict. "Michael, I can't." He repeated, his voice shifting into something clinical, something I recognized from his business calls. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something important, a hostile takeover. My board is paranoid. They're looking for any sign of instability." "Instability?" I repeated, not understanding. "If they find out my mother is homeless, that I'm dealing with family crisis, they'll question my judgment. They'll think I can't handle the pressure." He paused. "It's nothing personal, but what?" My voice sounded broken. He walked to a drawer and pulled out his wallet. Italian leather, imported. I'd given it to him 2 years ago for his birthday. He extracted bills, $150, another $100. He didn't count them, just handed them to me like a tip at a restaurant. "Get yourself a hotel," he said. "Somewhere clean. Take a shower rest. Then we can talk about fixing this. But you can't stay here." I stared at the cash in my hand. $250. The amount he'd asked me for weeks ago for his startup had been $250,000. "Michael," I said, and I could hear the pleading now. "Please, just tonight. I'm your mother." His jaw tightened. "I know who you are." The words were soft, but they cut deep. They said, "I know who you are, and it's not enough. You're not enough right now." He walked to the door and opened it, an invitation to leave. I stood there for a moment, hoping he would change his mind. Instead, he looked away. He couldn't even meet my eyes. I walked toward the door. As I passed, he added quietly, "When you get yourself sorted, call me. We'll figure something out." I didn't respond. I stepped out into the hallway and the door closed behind me with a soft click. But as I walked away, I heard something, a sound that stopped me cold. I turned back and peered through the hallway mirror. Through Michael's small window, I could see him. He was standing in his apartment staring at the closed door. His hand was pressed against the glass from the inside, and his face was twisted in pain. He wanted to help. I could see it. But something inside him had made a different choice. Fear had won over love. And somehow that was worse than if he'd simply turned me away without a second thought. 2 hours later, I stood outside Amber's townhouse in Beacon Hill, watching the warm light spill through her windows. The contrast felt surreal. 2 hours ago, I'd walked away from Michael's door with crumpled bills in my pocket. Now I was here at Amber's, my last daughter before Sophie. My legs ached. My fingers were numb, but I still had hope, fragile as it was. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, and I saw the exact moment Amber recognized me. Her hand flew to her mouth. Mom. Her voice came out strangled, shocked in a way Michael's hadn't been. Michael had reacted with practiced efficiency. Amber looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Amber? I said quietly. Oh my God, come inside, now, hurry. She pulled me in quickly, glancing over her shoulder at the street before closing the door. But unlike Michael's strategic urgency, hers felt panicked. She was genuinely frightened. Mom, what happened? Are you okay? You look... She stopped studying my face, my clothes, the dirt under my fingernails. What is this? I need help, sweetheart, I said. I've lost everything. My business, my home. I need a place to stay. Just for a night or two. Amber's face crumpled. For a moment, I thought she might cry. But then something shifted behind her eyes, a fear replacing the initial shock. Mom, This is complicated. She moved to the window, peering out nervously. My fiancé, Derek, he's upstairs. He doesn't know about our family. Not really. He doesn't know about you, about the business, about the money. He thinks I'm different. Independent, that I built my company on my own. I felt something crack inside my chest. He doesn't know who I am. It's not like that, Amber said quickly, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. It's just, if he sees you like this or finds out about our background, he's very particular about certain things. Status matters to him, and if he thinks I'm not being honest about who I am... She trailed off, but the implication was clear. She was ashamed, not of me, but of what I represented, the truth she'd been hiding. I understand. I said, though, I wasn't sure I did. She retrieved her wallet from the kitchen counter with trembling hands and pulled out several bills. Here, this should get you a decent hotel for a few nights, somewhere clean. You can shower, rest. She hesitated, her voice softening. There's a shelter on Hanover Street. They have beds, meals. The people there are kind. A shelter. My daughter was sending me to a shelter. Amber, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's just... Not now. Not with everything happening with Derek. She opened the door, glancing upstairs where presumably her fiancé was waiting. I do love you. You know that, right? I took the money and stepped back into the cold. As I turned away, I heard her close the door. Not with the decisive slam of Michael's departure, but with a gentle, apologetic click, somehow more heartbreaking because of its tenderness. The difference between Michael and Amber suddenly became clear. Michael had turned me away out of fear, fear of scandal, fear of what my presence might cost him. But Amber was ashamed. She loved me, I could feel that much. But she was so deeply ashamed of me, of what I represented, that she couldn't let her fiancé even know I existed. Which rejection was worse? The one born from ambition or the one born from shame? I walked down Beacon Hill's gas-lit streets toward Jamaica Plain, the bills clutched in my hand. 2 rejections. 2 different reasons, but the same result, the door closed. The love conditional. Michael had measured my worth in business terms. Amber had measured my worth in social terms. Both had found me wanting. I thought about Sophie somewhere in Jamaica Plain, probably reading or grading papers. My youngest daughter, the one I'd done the least for the one who'd ask nothing of me except to know that I was okay. What would she do when a homeless woman showed up at her door claiming to be her mother? Would she hesitate? Would she calculate there was one more daughter left? And as I walked through the Boston night, I finally understood that my entire life had been building toward this moment, toward discovering whether any of my children could love me for anything other than what I could provide. When Sophie opened the door, she recognized me instantly. I saw it in her eyes, that flash of acknowledgement, that moment of seeing beneath the dirt and the rags. But what happened next was nothing like what I'd experienced at Michael's and Amber's doors. "Mom." She didn't hesitate. She didn't calculate. She simply stepped aside. "Come in. You must be freezing." Behind her, I heard footsteps. A man appeared tall, warm-eyed, with the kind of face that naturally smiled. Jacob. I recognized him from photographs Sophie had sent over the years, though I'd never paid enough attention when we were all together. "Welcome home, Diane," he said, and his voice held no judgment, no fear. "Come on in, you're safe here." Safe. I hadn't felt that word in 3 days. Sophie guided me inside their modest Jamaica Plain house. It was nothing like my penthouse, no floor-to-ceiling windows, no minimalist design, no carefully curated art. Instead, there were bookshelves overflowing with worn paperbacks, a kitchen table scarred with years of use, and photographs pinned haphazardly to the refrigerator. It smelled like comfort coffee, old wood, something baking. "Let me run you a bath," Sophie said, already moving toward the hallway. "You need to get warm." "Sophie, I don't want to—" "Mom!" She turned back and there was such gentleness in her expression that I stopped mid-sentence. "Let me help you." 20 minutes later, I was submerged in hot water, real hot water, not the freezing spray from a gas station bathroom. Sophie had left clean towels on the toilet seat and a soft sweatshirt and sweatpants on the counter. Not expensive clothes, simple ones, but they were folded with care. When I emerged, Sophie had set the dinner table. Nothing fancy. Pasta with marinara, a simple salad, garlic bread. Jacob was already seated and he stood when I entered, a small gesture that somehow meant everything. "I hope you like pasta," Sophie said, ladling sauce onto my plate. "Jacob makes the best sauce. It's his grandmother's recipe." "My Nonna would be proud," Jacob said with a warm smile. "She always said the secret ingredient was made with love for the people you're feeding." We ate in comfortable silence, and gradually the tension in my shoulders began to ease. They didn't bombard me with questions. They didn't ask what had happened or where I'd been. They simply let me eat, let me be present, let me exist in their space without explanation or justification. Jacob refilled my water glass without being asked. Sophie made sure my plate stayed full. These small acts of care spoke louder than any words could have. After dinner, Sophie led me to a small guest room. The bed was made with fresh sheets and a small lamp cast a warm glow across the space. "You can stay as long as you need," Sophie said simply. "Sleep well." I lay in that bed listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Downstairs, I could hear Jacob and Sophie talking softly. Then after a while, the sound of movement on the couch, they were settling in for the night, giving me the bedroom. I crept to the door and peered out. In the dim light from the kitchen, I could see them on the couch, Jacob's arm around Sophie's shoulders, her hand resting on his chest. They weren't doing anything special. They were just there together, comfortable in the simple fact of each other's presence. And that's when it happened. The dam broke. I stood in the doorway of that small house in Jamaica Plain, and I wept. Not the controlled tears of disappointment from earlier. These were different. They came from a place so deep inside me that I didn't even know it existed. They were tears of recognition, of finally feeling what it meant to be truly, unconditionally loved. Sophie recognized me instantly. But unlike my older children, she didn't hesitate. She didn't calculate the cost or the risk. She saw her mother cold, dirty, desperate, and she simply loved. No conditions, no fear, no shame. And Jacob stood beside her without question, opening their home and their hearts as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, I realized something that all my years of building an empire had failed to teach me. The greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars or status. It's measured in the people who open their doors without question, who offer their warmth without expecting anything in return, who see you at your lowest and respond not with judgment but with grace. Sophie and Jacob had given me something Michael and Amber couldn't. They'd given me belonging. The next morning, Sophie found my credit card while doing laundry. In that single moment, everything I had carefully constructed came undone. I was still in the guest room, actually listening to the sounds of the house, waking up, coffee brewing, Jacob's soft footsteps, Sophie humming something in the hallway. It was so peaceful, so normal. For the first time in 3 days, I'd slept without the weight of dread pressing down on my chest. Then I heard Sophie's footsteps stop. The humming ceased. A moment later, there was a soft knock on the bedroom door. "Mom, can we talk?" I knew immediately. Somehow, I knew. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table when I came out, and she was holding my platinum card between 2 fingers like it was something fragile. The card caught the morning light, and I could see the raised lettering, Diane Richardson, Chief Executive Officer. Jacob stood nearby, his hand resting on Sophie's shoulder. Their faces weren't angry. If anything, they looked sad. "It fell out of your jacket pocket when I was sorting the laundry," Sophie said quietly. "I found it on the floor." I didn't try to lie. There was no point. "Yes," I said. "It's a test." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Why, Mom? Why didn't you trust us?" The question hit harder than any accusation could have. "Because I needed to feel it," I said, and the words came out raw, unguarded. I needed to know, not intellectually, not to just know that you loved me. I needed to feel it, to experience it. Michael asks for money. Amber asks for help, but worries about her reputation. But you, I paused looking at my youngest daughter, you just loved me, without question, without condition. Jacob moved closer and squeezed Sophie's shoulder gently. "Diane needed to feel the difference," he said softly, his voice warm with understanding. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she set the card down on the table between us. "Mom, we would have helped you anyway, even if you'd told us the truth from the beginning, even if we knew you were testing us. Don't you understand that—" "I do now," I whispered. "The problem isn't that you tested us," Sophie continued, wiping her eyes. "The problem is that you didn't believe we would help you unconditionally. You didn't believe we loved you for who you are, not what you have." Jacob pulled up a chair and sat down with us. "That's what matters," he said, looking directly at me. "Who you are, not what you own." Sophie reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm not angry, Mom. I'm sad. Sad that you felt you had to do this. Sad that somewhere along the way you stopped believing in us." She squeezed my fingers gently. "But I'm also grateful, because now you know. Now you know that we would do anything for you. Not because of what you can give us, but because you're our mother, because we love you." Then Sophie said something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. "Mom, no matter what happens next, we would have helped you. We would have welcomed you. We would have taken care of you." But I'm glad you finally know that. I'm glad you can feel it now, really feel it, instead of just wondering. Jacob reached over and squeezed my other hand, his grip steady and reassuring. The 3 of us sat there in silence, not an awkward silence, but one full of understanding. In that moment, sitting at their modest kitchen table in Jamaica Plain, I understood what I'd been searching for all along. It wasn't validation. It wasn't proof of love. It was the simple, uncomplicated knowledge that I was worth loving just as I was. Sophie had known that all along. She'd been trying to show me since the moment she opened her door. Now, finally, I believed her. After Sophie found the card, everything accelerated. I knew I couldn't wait. Not another day. Not another hour. If Michael and Amber were going to learn the truth, they needed to learn it now before Sophie made the choice to warn them, before they had time to prepare their defenses. I called Thomas at 10 a.m. "Sophie knows," I said without preamble. "We need to move up the timeline, noon today." There was a long pause on the other end. "Diane, are you absolutely certain? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your children will know everything." "That's the point," I said quietly. "They already know I'm here. They already know I'm alive. The only question now is whether they'll understand why I did this. And I think I'm ready to find out." "I'll call Michael and Amber," Thomas said. I'll tell them there's an urgent matter regarding your business. They'll come." I hung up and stood in the kitchen staring at nothing. Sophie appeared in the doorway, Jacob right behind her. They'd heard enough to understand what was happening. "What comes next?" Jacob asked quietly. Sophie moved to stand beside me. "Now we wait, and we see if they can be better than they were before." The morning stretched out like taffy. Every minute felt like an hour. I tried to eat breakfast, but the food turned to ash in my mouth. Sophie made coffee. Jacob sat at the table reading, but not really reading, his presence a steady anchor in the growing storm of anticipation. By 11 a.m., I was pacing. By 11:30 a.m., my phone was buzzing with confused texts from Michael and Amber. "Mom's lawyer is saying there's an emergency. Everything okay? Is everything all right with the business?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. There were no words that would prepare them. At 11:45 a.m., Thomas called. "I'm 10 minutes out. Michael and Amber are both en route. They think they're coming to a business meeting." "Are you ready?" I asked him. "The question is whether you are," Thomas replied, and then he hung up. Sophie placed her hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "We can still stop it." But I shook my head. "No, I do have to do this. They deserve to know. And I deserve to know if they can love me for who I am, not what I have." At 11:50 a.m., my phone rang again. Michael's number. "Mom, the lawyer called an emergency meeting. Is everything okay? Is it the business?" I could hear the panic in his voice. Not concern for me, but concern for his access to capital, his reputation, his position. "Just come, Michael. Bring Amber. It's time we had a real conversation." I hung up before he could ask more questions. The next 15 minutes felt like they stretched into eternity. Sophie and Jacob stood with me in the living room. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the sound of my own breathing. At 11:58 a.m., headlights appeared outside. At 11:59 a.m., I heard car doors slam. At 12 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking. 15 years of building an empire had been easier than this moment, the moment when I would finally know whether my children could see me for who I really was. Sophie squeezed my hand. Jacob stood behind us both, and I walked toward the door. Everything I'd constructed, the test, the disappearance, the pain, the revelation, it all led to this single moment. In the next few minutes, my children would walk through that door. They would see their homeless mother. They would see their professor sister and bus driver brother-in-law standing beside me. And they would understand finally that I had been willing to risk everything, my reputation, my relationships, my dignity, just to know if they loved me. The doorbell rang again, impatient, demanding. I reached for the handle. Behind that door was either redemption or heartbreak, maybe both, and I was finally ready to find out. When Michael and Amber stepped through that door, they had no idea that everything they believed about themselves was about to crumble. Michael came first, his expression already shifting from confusion to something resembling concern. Amber was right behind him, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder, her nails perfectly manicured. They were dressed for a business meeting. They were prepared for a problem to solve. They were not prepared for me. I stood there in Sophie's kitchen in my thrift store clothes, my unwashed hair pulled back with a rubber band, my hands still bearing the faint traces of dirt from 3 days on Boston streets. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Mom!" Michael's voice cracked. "Mom, what are you doing here? What happened?" Amber's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God! Oh my God, is this, are you homeless?" Sophie stood up slowly from the kitchen table. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Michael, Amber, I found Mom's credit card 2 days ago. I've known the entire time. Jacob and I still helped her. We gave her shelter, food, and love, not because of what she had, but because she's our mother." The words hung in the air like a weapon. Before either of them could respond, the back door opened. Thomas Blackwell walked in, tall, gray-haired, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind him were 2 members of his security team. Michael and Amber exchanged a confused glance. "What's going on?" Michael demanded, his voice taking on that edge it got when he felt his control slipping. "Who are these people? Mom, explain what's happening." Thomas set his briefcase on the dining table and opened it with deliberate slowness. He removed 3 copies of a document and laid them out. "Diane Richardson," he said, looking directly at Michael and Amber. "Chief Executive Officer, current net worth $68 million, not bankrupt, not homeless, not in need of financial assistance." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that fills a room when something fundamental shifts. Michael's face went pale. Amber's hand trembled as she reached for the document. "I needed to know," I said, and my voice shifted. This was the voice I'd used in boardrooms for 40 years, the voice of someone with absolute authority. "I spent 40 years building an empire. I gave each of you opportunities, education, capital, connections, and all I received in return were phone calls asking for money, requests for help that never came with real love attached." Michael tried to speak, but his throat seemed to close up. "So I disappeared." I continued, my tone ice cold now. "I became someone you didn't recognize, someone you couldn't profit from. I wanted to see who would open their door, not for my money, but for me, and the results were crystal clear." Amber's eyes were filling with tears, but they weren't tears of joy or relief. They were tears of recognition, of shame. Michael sat down slowly on one of the kitchen chairs like his legs had stopped working. "You were testing us," he whispered. "All this time, you were testing us." "Yes," I said flatly, "and you both failed. You failed spectacularly." The word hung between us, failed. Michael had given me $50 because he was afraid of scandal. Amber had given me money but turned me away because she was ashamed. Neither of them had opened their door with an open heart. Neither of them had asked if I was okay. They'd only asked what I needed and how I could be made to disappear. Sophie moved to stand beside me. Jacob appeared from the hallway, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "Sophie didn't fail," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Sophie and Jacob opened their door without question. They didn't ask me for anything. They didn't fear what I represented. They simply loved. And that is the only metric that matters in this family." Amber began to cry in earnest, now deep, gulping sobs that came from somewhere fundamental inside her. Michael's jaw clenched, and I could see the moment he understood. The moment he realized that all his calculations, all his careful navigation of his reputation and his business interests had amounted to nothing when it mattered most. "I don't expect forgiveness," I said, and my voice remained steady, unwavering. "But I do expect change. Real change. And I'm willing to help you learn what Sophie already knows, that love isn't transactional. It isn't something you give when it's convenient or when it serves your interests." The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of 2 people confronting themselves for the first time in their lives, forced to see that the empire they'd been taught to worship had hollow foundations. Michael looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not shame exactly, but something deeper, something that looked like the beginning of understanding. And in that moment, I knew that the hardest part of this test wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you're still here, I need to know. Drop a comment, anything. Let me feel you're with me. One more thing, the story ahead includes some fictionalized elements. Some moments are dramatized for emotional impact. Not everything is literally true, but the lessons about family and love are real. If that's not for you, you can stop here. But if you want to see what happens when a family finally chooses each other, stay with me. Michael spoke first, his voice cracking on the words. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't even know who I am anymore." It was the most honest thing I'd heard him say in years. Amber was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "I was terrified," she whispered. "I was afraid that if I helped you, if I acknowledged the mess, then I'd become like you. Alone, unloved, dependent on money to feel like I mattered." I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition so complete it rendered me speechless. She was right. I had taught them to fear becoming like me. I had modeled a life so consumed by achievement that love had become just another transaction to be managed. That's exactly the problem, I said quietly, my own voice unsteady. I taught you that. I modeled it for you. I spent so many years chasing success, building wealth, that I never taught you the difference between having value and having money. I made you believe they were the same thing. Jacob spoke next, his voice steady and clear in the way of someone who'd grown up understanding what actually mattered. That's what I never understood about your world, Diane. Money is important, I know that. But my nonna, she had almost nothing. She lived in a small apartment in the North End. She worked as a cleaner her whole life. But she was rich in love. She was rich in family, and that's what she passed on to Sophie. Sophie nodded her hand, finding mine across the table. We knew you were successful. We always knew. But that was never the reason we loved you. We loved you because you were our mother. We helped you because you needed help. That's what family does. Jacob reached over and squeezed my shoulder. Right now, in this moment, we're a family. Not because of how much money anyone has, but because we choose to be. Because we show up for each other. Because love is the real transaction, not money. Michael looked at Amber, and I could see the exact moment they both understood. The moment they saw themselves clearly, as if looking in a mirror for the first time and recognizing not the success they'd built, but the emptiness they'd created beneath it. I've been so focused on my image, Amber said almost to herself, on what people think, on maintaining this perfect version of myself that I don't even recognize anymore. And I've been so obsessed with growth, with scaling, with building the next thing. Michael added, his voice raw with realization, that I forgot to look at what I already had, what I was throwing away. I watched my oldest children come face to face with themselves, and it was painful to witness. This was the ugliness of truth, not the warm, redemptive kind you read about in books, but the kind that cuts deep because you can't hide from it anymore. I won't pretend this is easy, I said, my voice firm but gentle. I won't pretend that what I've taught you, that success is measured in dollars, that love is something you earn through achievement, disappears overnight just because you've acknowledged it. But this conversation right now, this is the beginning of something different. Sophie squeezed my hand. We're here, Mom. Whatever comes next, we're here. Jacob nodded with quiet certainty. Family stays together, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Michael and Amber exchanged another look, this one completely different from before. Not the look of people who'd been caught in a lie, but the look of people who'd finally understood what they were losing, who'd finally recognized what they could still choose to be. I want to be different, Michael said. I don't know how yet, but I want to be better. Me too, Amber whispered. I want to be real. I want to be the kind of daughter who loves her mother without conditions. I looked at my 4 children, 3 of them looking back at me with hope and understanding, and 2 of them looking at themselves with the kind of honest reckoning that only comes when you've finally stopped running from truth. And I realized that this moment, as painful as it was exactly what I'd been searching for all along. Not vindication, not proof of their unworthiness, but the moment when we all stopped pretending. When we all faced the truth that we'd built a system where love came with conditions, where family was transactional, where success meant more than belonging. For the first time, my children saw themselves clearly, and it was the most painful and beautiful thing I'd ever witnessed. I laid out the conditions clearly, not as suggestions, as demands. There are 4 conditions, I said, and my voice carried the weight of 40 years of boardroom authority. And they are non-negotiable. Michael and Amber sat rigidly, sensing the shift in my tone. This wasn't a mother speaking. This was a CEO laying down terms. First condition, family therapy. Every week for 3 years, all 5 of us, a professional to help us untangle what we've become. But more importantly, to document your progress, or lack thereof. I let that sink in. Second condition, social service work. I want each of you to spend time with people who have genuinely nothing, not for Instagram posts, not for tax write-offs, for real. until you understand what it means to need help without a safety net. Amber wrapped her arms around herself. Third condition. Real apologies, not practiced, not polished. Raw apologies. You tell me what you did wrong, why it was wrong, and what you're going to do differently. And you do this over and over until the performance stops and the truth begins. Michael's jaw clenched. And fourth time, 3 years, not 3 months. 3 years of actual work, not going through the motions. Real, visible, measurable change. I paused. Let the silence build. Now let me be absolutely clear about what happens if you fail. Michael leaned forward. And if we don't, if we can't do it? This was the moment. This was when they needed to understand what they stood to lose. Then I rewrite my will, I said flatly. Everything, and I mean everything, goes to Sophie and Jacob. Not $10 million. Not $20 million, all $68 million. Every investment, every property, every asset, gone from your inheritance. Amber's face went white. Her hand trembled. You're talking about losing everything. I continued, my voice ice cold. Not because I'm punishing you out of cruelty, but because at a certain point money has to mean something. It has to reflect values. It has to represent character. And right now, your choices suggest that you value your image more than your mother, your reputation more than your family, your comfort more than your conscience. Michael stood up abruptly. For a moment, I thought he'd walk out. Instead, he paced toward the window, his hands shaking. If you rewrite the will, he said, his voice barely controlled, that means we lose everything, our inheritances, our futures, everything you built. Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what it means. But Sophie and Jacob, Amber started. Sophie and Jacob will be protected, I said. They will be rewarded. They will inherit what they earned through their love, what they demonstrated through their actions. You both had the same opportunity. You chose differently. Thomas stood silently, the agreement papers on the table before us, simple, stark, unforgiving. This isn't a negotiation, I said. This is a boundary. This is me telling you that I finally understand my own value, that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional financial support, that you are welcome to rebuild your relationship with me, but the cost of failure is absolute, complete, total. Michael turned from the window. His face had shifted. Something in him understood now this wasn't about money anymore. This was about whether he was willing to change or willing to lose everything. I'll do it, he said. All 4 conditions. I accept. Amber didn't hesitate. Me too, I accept all of it. I watched them sign the agreement, not because they suddenly became better people, but because now they understood that their choices had consequences. Real ones, not theoretical ones, not someday ones, now ones. 3 years, I said as they signed. If you do this work, if you actually do it, we'll revisit. We'll see who you've become. We'll see if your love is real. And if it is, we'll have a different conversation. But this, I pointed at the will, this is your starting point. This is what you're playing for. Sophie squeezed my hand gently. Jacob stood with his arm around Sophie's shoulders, witnessing this moment. This isn't about punishment, I said, and I meant it. This is about consequence. This is about teaching you what Sophie and Jacob have always known, that love can't be bought, that family can't be purchased, that your inheritance isn't your birthright, it's something you have to earn through being the kind of person worth inheriting from. The agreement was signed. The terms were clear. The stakes were absolute. Michael looked at the document in his hands like it was a death sentence. Amber's tears had finally come. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of genuine fear. And for the first time, I saw something shift in their eyes. Not gratitude, not redemption, not yet, but recognition. Finally, they recognized what they stood to lose. The afternoon light filtered through the white curtains as Sophie and Jacob sat across from me at the kitchen table. Thomas stood beside me, a manila envelope in his hands, his expression calm and purposeful. Michael and Amber had gone to the living room to give us space, a gesture I hadn't expected, but one that told me something had shifted in them overnight. Sophie Jacob. I began, my voice softer than it had been yesterday. You took a test that you didn't even know you were taking. Sophie's eyes widened slightly. Jacob reached over and squeezed her hand. When I walked away from Michael's house with $250 in my pocket, I was desperate. When Amber closed her door on me, I was broken. But when you— I paused, looking at Sophie. Opened that door without hesitation, I finally understood what real love looked like. Thomas stepped forward and placed the envelope on the table between us. "What's this?" Jacob asked, his voice cautious. "Open it," I said. Sophie's hands trembled as she reached for it. Inside was a deed. Official paperwork stamped and notarized. I watched her eyes scan the document, watched the moment realization hit her face. "Maman," she whispered. "This is a house deed. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, approximately 1,000 square feet, Thomas explained. Located in Jamaica Plain, fully paid, in both of your names." Jacob leaned over to read the document, his jaw slack. We don't understand." "You don't need to understand right now," I said. "You just need to know that you earned it." "But we didn't do anything to earn a house," Sophie said, her voice breaking slightly. We just loved you, Maman. We didn't expect anything in return." "Exactly," I said, reaching across the table to take both their hands. "That's why you deserve it." Jacob's eyes glistened. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "It's real," Thomas confirmed, sliding another envelope across the table. "There's also a retirement fund established for both of you, $500,000 each, growing at a steady rate. You'll never have to worry about money again." Sophie's face crumpled. She stood up abruptly, and for a moment I thought she might walk away, might reject this gift, the way part of me feared she would. Instead, she came around the table and wrapped her arms around me, her entire body shaking with sobs. "Don't cry because of money," I whispered into her hair. "Cry because you know what it means." "What does it mean?" Jacob asked, his own voice thick with emotion. "It means that when everything else fell away, when I had nothing and nobody, you were still there. Not because of who I was before, not because of my title or my bank account. You were there because you chose to be, because love isn't a transaction, it's a choice, and you chose me." Jacob joined us then, his long arms wrapping around both Sophie and me, and we stood there together in that small Jamaica Plain kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd felt the first genuine warmth in decades, where I'd tasted real home for the first time. "I have something else to tell you both," I said when we finally sat back down. "The house, the retirement fund, these are yours to keep, but they're not the real gift." Sophie wiped her eyes. "What's the real gift?" "The real gift is that I finally know what matters. For 20 years, I built an empire worth $68 million. I wore designer clothes and stayed in penthouse suites, but none of that could open a door when I needed shelter. None of that could put a warm meal in front of me when I was hungry. None of that could sit with me in silence and make me feel like I wasn't invisible." Jacob nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "You did that," I continued, looking at both of them. "You with your teacher's salary and your bus driver's paycheck. You with your small apartment and your simple meals. You showed me that real wealth is measured in the people who show up when you have nothing left to give." Sophie reached across the table again, this time squeezing my hand. "We're still a family, right? Even with the house and the money. Yes, I said, we're still a family. We're just a family that doesn't have to be afraid of losing each other to circumstances anymore." That evening, as Sophie and Jacob made dinner together in their new kitchen, the legal paperwork now sitting in a folder on the counter, I sat on the porch and watched the sun sink lower in the sky. Inside, I could hear them laughing, making plans, already thinking about which bedroom would be the guest room for when Michael and Amber came to visit. They had passed the test not by expecting reward, but by loving without condition. And in teaching them about inheritance and security, I was teaching them something far more valuable, that the love we give freely is the only wealth that compounds over time. Sophie appeared in the doorway, backlit by the warm kitchen light. "Maman, dinner's ready." I stood up and walked inside into the warmth and laughter and the simple, ordinary miracle of finally feeling like I belonged. As the afternoon turned to evening, something fundamental had shifted. We were no longer a family bound by money. We were connected by something far more real. Michael sat at the kitchen table, Sophie beside him now instead of across from him. "I get it now," he said quietly. "All this time I thought making money was the point of living. I thought if I could just accumulate enough, achieve enough, build enough, then somehow I'd matter. Then somehow I'd be worthy of love." Amber nodded slowly. "I feel like a stranger to myself," she admitted. "Like I've been pretending to be someone for so long that I forgot who I actually am. But tonight I want to remember." I thought about the people I'd met during those 3 days of living outside my penthouse. The woman at the shelter who shared her blanket even though she had barely enough for herself. The man at the bus station who warned me about dangerous corners. The nurse who bought me coffee without asking anything in return. The homeless people I met, I said gently, they taught me something that no amount of money could have purchased. They taught me that the poorest people are often the richest in spirit. That kindness isn't something you can quantify. That love isn't a transaction. Sophie reached over and took my hand. "Mom, I never looked down on you. Not for a second. You're my mother, and I love you. It's that simple." Jacob stood and walked to the small window that overlooked their neighborhood. "Right now in this house, we're a family. Not because of bank accounts or business deals or social status. We're a family because we choose to be, because we show up for each other, because love is the foundation." I looked around their modest Jamaica Plain home at the worn furniture, the overflowing bookshelves, the photographs clustered on the refrigerator. This wasn't my penthouse on the 23rd floor. There was no marble countertop, no minimalist art, no view that screamed success. This was home. "I built a $68 million empire," I said, and the words felt different now, not a boast, but a confession. "I created jobs. I built businesses. I accumulated wealth that most people could never imagine. But do you know what my real legacy is?" I looked at each of my children. Michael, with his CEO ambition slowly transforming into genuine curiosity about what matters. Amber shedding the carefully constructed facade and discovering something real underneath. Sophie and Jacob, who had known all along that this was the answer. "My real legacy isn't the money," I said softly. "It's not the business empire that will eventually be sold or dissolved or passed on to strangers. The real wealth I created was this, a family that's learning how to love each other authentically. That's the inheritance that actually matters." Sophie moved to stand beside me. Jacob appeared from the hallway, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "Sophie didn't need to earn my love," I said, my voice gentle, now warm with understanding. "And neither do you, Michael. Neither do you, Amber. Love isn't something you buy or deserve or achieve. It just is. And my deepest wish is that you finally understand that." Michael and Amber stayed that night. We sat around the kitchen table until midnight, and not once did anyone mention money. We talked about books and dreams deferred. We talked about fears and disappointments. We talked about what it means to change. We talked about who we wanted to become. At one point, Michael looked at Sophie and Jacob and said, "I'm sorry it took me this long to understand. I'm sorry it took Mom's test to show me what was right in front of me the whole time." "You're here now," Sophie said simply. "That's what matters." As the night deepened and my children drifted toward sleep, I stood at the window of this small house in Jamaica Plain and thought about the woman I'd been just days ago. The CEO in the penthouse who thought she could quantify love. The mother who believed that providing material success was the same as providing a home. I built a $68 million empire. But tonight I finally understand what I was actually searching for all along. The greatest legacy isn't measured in millions. It's measured in the people around your table who love you not for what you have, but for who you are. It's measured in the morning light, falling through a small window onto the faces of children who stayed because they wanted to. It's measured in the silence between conversations that doesn't need to be filled. For 60 years, I searched for validation in wealth. For 60 years, I mistook accumulation for achievement. For 60 years, I built everything except the one thing that actually mattered. Now finally, I understand. The greatest wealth is simply this: a family that chooses each other over and over again, even when it's hard. And I am finally, peacefully, completely home. I built a $68 million empire, but I almost lost everything that actually mattered. For 40 years, I believed that success meant accumulation. That love was something you earned through achievement, that my worth was tied to my bank account. I taught my children these lies, and they learned them well. Michael learned to chase money. Amber learned to hide behind image, and I nearly lost them both forever. Here's what I wish I'd understood sooner. Don't be like me. Don't wait for a crisis to recognize real love when it's standing in front of you. Don't confuse providing material comfort with providing a home. Don't teach your children that their value is measured in dollars. The real wealth isn't in what you accumulate, it's in who shows up for you when you have nothing. It's in the people who help you without asking, "What's in it for me?" It's in the hands that steady you when you fall. That's real family drama stories, and it's the story every generation needs to hear. Too many families like mine. Let money become the god they worship, instead of recognizing that grandma stories. The real ones about sacrifice and unconditional love are the inheritance that actually matters. God showed me grace through my children. God reminded me through poverty that I'd been measuring success by the wrong standard. And God gave me a second chance when I deserved none. If you're in a family where money has become the measure of love, hear this: it doesn't have to stay that way. Change is possible. Family drama stories don't have to end in separation. Healing begins when someone chooses vulnerability over pride. The grandma stories our families need aren't the ones about money or status. They're the ones about real love, real sacrifice, real family. These are the true inheritance. The greatest tragedy would be if my children or yours learn too late what I'm telling you. Now grandma stories like this one about unconditional love and family redemption are the lessons that actually transform lives. Family drama stories teach us what matters, and God shows up in those moments when we finally see it. Don't wait for your third chance. Start today. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Let your family know that love without conditions is possible. Comment below with your own family lessons. And if you're struggling with financial or emotional abuse in your family, reach out to someone you trust. Disclaimer: this content contains dramatized storytelling elements for educational purposes. Some details are fictionalized, but the core lessons about recognizing financial and emotional abuse within families are real. If this storytelling style doesn't resonate with you, that's perfectly okay. Please seek content that better serves your needs.